Hello there folks, just a quick video update for you today, just to explain to you where I am with things basically, because I realise it's been a while now since I've put any new videos out. Obviously a lot of what you saw over the winter months was archival stuff that I'd shot ages ago or last year, that I'd had saved up and stored in my library. We're now at the stage where I'm recording new stuff as we're working along. Speaking of new stuff, the main thing I've been working on recently is the XC90. You may notice or know it passed its MOT recently, so that was good news. But we're a long way away from being at the end of the things to do with that car. And the thing I've turned my attention to most recently is the gearbox. Now, unfortunately, on that car, it looks like it's had an issue or has an issue with its torque converter. It's kind of forgivable, really, when you consider the fact that it has done 177,000 miles and it's all original. But what I noticed when I was driving it was that as you were going over 55, you were getting like a shudder, a shuddering lockup as you were driving it. It was making it quite unpleasant. I've just completed a gearbox service on that, and we're going to see, or you'll see in a future video, whether or not that, plus any magic potions that I may or may not have used, will cure the problem. After I've done that, I've got all the engine mounts to do on it, I've got the cam belt to do on it, and then I need to still investigate the source of my front end wobble. I think, listening to the noises that it's making, it's the near side front wheel bearing that isn't right, but I may wind up doing the track rods anyway. Once all that's done, there will be some form of road trip in it, a proper review. I'm planning to do the sort of two entirely different animals, the XC60 and the XC90, next to one another, because there's actually 10 years between those two on my fleet, and it's quite interesting because they're both SUVs, they're both made by Volvo, they're both completely different in terms of the way they drive and feel. Yeah, completely different animals. So I'll do that, and then I think, to be honest with you, the XC90 will then be put up for sale, because I don't need two SUVs, to be honest with you, and the XC60 is just so incredibly competent that I think owning both of those cars, two cars together, is daft. And if I'm going to have one sort of classic modern to have projects on to do regularly, I may as well have something that's a completely different format. So that's probably where we're going to go in the direction with that. Speaking of cars that are going to be for sale, I tweeted recently, I didn't tweet, I posted, because we don't do Twitter anymore, do we? I posted recently on Blue Sky that the other P2 that I'm probably going to put up for sale soon is my V70 2.5T. It was borrowed by Jim McGill of Also Driven over the winter, but now it's just sitting in Sean's barn, and it seems daft for it to just sit there. I've enjoyed the car, I've had my time with it, I've saved the gearbox in it, and I think it's just time to move that vehicle on. That will come with a crap ton of spares when it does get sold. I've got ball joints, wishbones, rear shock absorbers, front discs and pads, a PCV system that I never got round to fitting, and I'm sure some other parts that will be included in the sale of that as well. So look out at some point for a post or a video in the future about that vehicle being up for sale. Because yeah, I need to simplify a little bit this year. One of the reasons I really need to simplify is because of where I'm currently sat now. Because VEP is being neglected. And when I say neglected, I don't mean that I'm not doing things to it that I need to get done, but with all the other distractions I've had going on over the last 6 months, VEP sort of slid to the bottom of the list of things to do. Not least, of course, because there was no way I was going to take this car out on the roads in the winter. I nearly put it back on the road, I think, last week, and then literally watched a gritter go by outside and went, nope, not happening. But VEP needs stuff doing. Longer term stuff, mechanically, starts, runs and drives, all those things, but I'm talking now more about the processes of getting this car cosmetically better. Obviously, I did a big job with it last year getting this interior fitted, but there's loads more to do. I want to get the crusty rear panels sorted out. I'm looking for a set of rust-free doors. I have a set of wheels that Adventures in Rust very kindly gave me at Rustival last year to go on this, so that I can have the diamond cut style wheels that the TRS models used to have. So there's loads and loads and loads to do. And like I say, every moment that I'm spending doing something else on one of the other cars at the moment is time I'm not spending on this one. I also need to have a little bit of a chat with you about this car, which I'll probably do in a separate video. Jim and Sean are aware that I have very mixed feelings about VEP. Might have been a case of, you know, childhood idolized car and then buying it and then going, oh my god, is this what they were actually like? But the BX for me has been a very curious mixture of, my god, that's brilliant, and dear god, that's terrible in terms of the way it drives. And again, I'll do a little bit more of a detailed video of that on some point in the future, but it's quite amazing how good certain aspects of it are, like the brakes. The brakes are terrific for such an old car. And then there's other things that are just ergonomically rubbish and kind of, for me, at times take the enjoyment out of driving it a little bit. The biggest elephant in the room, by the way, and if you've watched Hubnut and Seabrook's most recent BX video, you'll hear I even got a mention on it, is about this lack of power steering. Now, I'll admit, I have been spoiled. I've had one car prior to this without power steering, and that was my 1100cc Peugeot 205. And getting back in this, I've really struggled with a lack of power steering. It's not so much been how it drives round town and parking. I can sort of live with that. But when you're rolling along at slower speeds, you don't get any feel at all. All you get is weight. And the thing that most perturbs me when I drive it is because the chassis is so willing and the engine is so willing, and you'll find yourself going through a relatively fast-flowing roundabout or set of bends. And what keeps happening with me in this car is I'll get into that bend, and then just as I'm turning in, the steering weights up in a way that I'm just not used to. And you lose a little bit of feel. And at the same time as that, you're also sinking into these incredibly soft French seats. So the steering gets heavy, you're sort of trying to counter against it and don't really have any support. And at times, particularly when I'm doing, I'm not saying a reckless drive, just like an enjoyable twisty drive, it makes me feel like I'm not quite in control of it. And funnily enough, when I drove another also driven car, I recently had a go in Jim and Sean's Peugeot 106 diesel. That also doesn't have power steering, and again, it's quite a heavy setup. I kind of had that same feel going through the bends of that slight sense of unease because the assistance isn't there. So some of that, again, is just my frame of reference, and because I've been spoiled by driving a lot of new modern cars over the last 20 or so years with power steering. But it's become a bit of a hang-up for me when I drive this car, and because it's also the only manual I own, it's kind of, I've not enjoyed driving it as much as I'd hoped. The last thing in sort of the frame of reference thing is refinement as well, which I'll talk about again in more detail in a future video. But I was amazed how noisy this is at 70. And I'm sure anybody that owns a BX or any other 90s car is probably going to be looking and pointing and laughing at me in the comments going, yeah, they're all like that. What are you going on about? But yeah, dual carriageways and motorways in this I dread. And I'm sure this is a quiet 80s car. But I'm going to have to do something about that, because it's if I keep this car long term, and I do intend to keep this car long term, I've got to do something about that to try and improve my enjoyment of it. And back to improving my enjoyment of it, I may look at retrofitting power steering in some way into this car, whether that is by sorting out, it may well be that it has to go to a Citroen specialist and we'll get the correct FDV and a sort of a period correct steering rack put in, or whether I look at retrofitting one of the more modern electric systems that can be spliced into the column. I don't know. I know for some purists they'll say, oh, you're going to ruin it by fitting power steering to it. Quite frankly, I don't care. This is my car and I want to enjoy driving it. So if I want it to have pass, it's going to have pass. And having spoken to a few other people sort of around the houses, the most folk I've spoken to seem to think that these are better with power steering. So again, I think I would probably enjoy the car a lot more if it did have power steering. The alternative is I go out and buy a Mark II and I move this on to somebody else. That would be hard for me because my childhood memory, although my dad worked for Citroen in the late 80s, early 90s, so I do remember a lot of Mark IIs coming along, my main childhood memory is the Mark I aesthetic. It is this dashboard, this layout, the smaller indicators on the front, and everything else. So this is far more interesting and personal for me. So it could eventually be, and again, some purists are not going to like it, that VEP winds up being very visually a Mark I, but it may have Mark II refinements underneath just to improve the drivability of it. But we'll see. That's just where I am with it at the moment. And like I say, I love looking at it. I love sitting in it. I love showing it to people, but at the moment, I don't really enjoy driving it. And I need to do something about that and sort of try and rekindle that. It's also not helped, by the way. I didn't think I was going to talk this long about VEP, but hey ho, we're sat here and I'm recording, and this is going to go out today, so whatever. The other thing that's been a little bit of an issue for me is I've had this joke with Miss Hubnut, Carly, this sort of cars are ungrateful business. And VEP has been a little bit ungrateful, I've got to be perfectly honest with you, of late, in terms of, or certainly towards the end of last year, in terms of stuff. Again, I think anybody who owns a 1980s/1990s French car is going to go, yeah, all sounds pretty normal to me. But there have been things that have gone on. I've had, I think the biggest dent to my confidence was the Octopus. I won't go into a huge amount of detail on it, but basically there's a set of return pipes that Citroen put in a really stupid place on the front subframe, and I think it was the line that went from the front height corrector back up to the tank that got a split in it, but it would only burst hydraulic fluid out under very certain circumstances and pressures. Not dangerous to the high pressure system at all, but obviously it filled me with absolute terror and dread when I got it home one day and there was a huge puddle of LHM underneath. Getting that patched took quite a few attempts. I think it went to a specialist local to me twice before I even managed to get that sorted. And in that time, I had a few other things done. I think in the space of a week, if I remember correctly, I filled it up with petrol and petrol exploded everywhere because there was a split in the top of the fuel filler pipe, and then it spat LHM all the way out of the front. After I'd got all that sorted out, it then ate a wheel bearing on the, I think it was on the near side front. And that was a saga in itself. You're in serious trouble, by the way, when a specialist you take your car to rings you to say, can you tell us what wheel bearing your car needs, because we can't figure it out. Anyway, it turns out that because this BX is so early, it has a completely different set of wheel bearings than are fitted to all other BXs and Xantias and Belingos and pretty much everything else they made afterwards. But I managed to do a bit of cross-referencing and figured it out that it was the same as basically what this car is derived from, because this platform, I think, shares a lot in common with the Peugeot 305 underneath. So that sort of went and looked at what wheel bearings the 305 had, and sure enough, they were the same. So yeah, that was a sort of a bit of a pain to sort out. And like I say, because it took a while to get that wheel bearing sorted out as well, and it spent a lot of time sat waiting at the specialist, trying to get the hydraulic leak fixed and a few other things, the period of time where I would have perhaps bonded with this car a bit more and taken it on a few road trips and taken it somewhere, instead it was sitting waiting to have stuff done to it. So yeah, it's been a bit of a shame, but certainly my first year with this car, I haven't enjoyed as much as I'd hoped to. I hope that doesn't upset anybody if they sort of hear that and go, oh no. I think it was always going to be this way as well, because you've got to think of childhood me having this incredibly sort of how do I describe this? this sort of incredibly idealistic version of what this car must be like. And at the end of the day, I was sat back there, I wasn't driving it. And 43-year-old me that has to pay the bills and actually drive it in busy traffic and deal with everything else and sort of, you know, go down the road in it was always going to sort of feel and perceive it differently. So I don't, that's not a slight on the car. I think that's kind of sort of childhood expectations being matched with 43-year-old reality. So hopefully that kind of makes sense and I'm not talking complete and total nonsense. So yeah, that's where we are with that. XC90, which I'll finally round up with. I have got a couple of little jobs I want to do on that, actually. I've got an electrical fault in the door which I need to try and track down and sort out. But otherwise, that is just sort of plodding along quite happily and is running lovely. Last thing to mention, I said the XC90 was the last thing to mention, and it hasn't wound up being. Shows, I am booked at Rustival, I am booked at Festival of the Unexceptional. I will be doing the thing that's coming up soonest is TMS. It's not Hinckley this time, it's Leicester. They do a heritage meet where they encourage people to drive, who drive older Volvos to come along to the dealer. It's quite a nice little event. They put pastries and coffees out for everybody. There's an opportunity to get booked in, put your car on the ramp and stuff. And it's sort of a nice little event that TMS do every quarter. I will be at the one at Leicester, which I think is not this weekend, the weekend after. I'll put the date up on screen now so that you know when that is. You need to pre-book. I'll also include a link to the form. But I will be there with the Nordic Rides people who sort of attend that one quite regularly. So I'm going to that one. I'm giving the NEC a miss this year. A bit of a shame, but I've got a lot of other expenses going on at the moment. I'm nearly at the point where I'm about to put some flooring in the living room. And anybody who knows me will know that that entire project has taken far more time than it would take any sane individual. I've been without a living room for a year. You can tell I live alone, can't you? At one point I had 2 doors in there and 4 tyres. But anyway, I think I've rambled on for long enough. I've been rambling on now by the looks of things for nearly 18 minutes. So I'll try and get this down to something manageable and get it out to you. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed over the last year or so. It's been great to get comments. And that's the other thing as well, is please do keep giving me comments and feedback on the videos as I put them out. I've tried to make my editing a little bit tighter. I've tried to sort of not take you through the process of undoing and doing. I'm listening to Jim at the moment. You're watching you undo, literally watching you undo and undo every single bolt. I can hear his criticisms now. Love you, Jim. But yeah, so I have tried to sort of shrink those down, and hopefully you will continue to see the benefits of that. That said, the way I've just shot the XC90 video, I've created an absolute nightmare for myself, and I now need to go back and try and re-edit it and sort it all out, but we'll see. So anyway, I'm rambling and waffling. I'm now going to have a little bit more hot brown. I basically came out in VEP to relax and sort of chill out for a bit, because it's been a day of dealing with idiots in my day job. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please do consider subscribing before you go, if you haven't done already. And like I say, loads more on the BX to come, loads more on the XC90 to come. Hopefully some road tests, plenty of shows to do this year. And yeah, more of it. And like I say, and if I see you anywhere, please do feel free to say hello. I may occasionally look slightly grumpy, but I am generally approachable, although my work colleagues will probably dispute that. But yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in a future video. Bye! Cheerio!